If I say the word dog, what's the first thing that comes to your mind? If you're like me, or many others, you might think pet, or furry animal, or something along the lines of man's best friend. These are, by convention, some of the most common ways dogs are seen in our society. Now, not as commonly, dogs might be seen as food in places where it's common to eat them, or as employee, where they work in law enforcement, or as guard dogs, or as therapy animals. In some places, it might be normal to kill dogs in the name of science, whereas in others, that would be a total crime. Now, all these different ways of looking at dogs are known as discourses, which are narratives or constructs about a certain topic. There are discourses on virtually everything we know, from rainbows to fruits to racism, justice, and even pickles. Discourses are a product of language, and they're shaped by the words that we say to each other. Eventually, what happens is that the most powerful discourses drown out the quieter ones, and this shapes the cultural norms of our society and the structure of our institutions as a whole. That's why if I told you that I owned a slave, you would think that I'm a criminal. But if I did the same thing 200 or 300 years ago, you would just shrug a shoulder and pass it off as normal. Discourses shape society. And I want you to think about the word resilience. What are the first things that come to your mind when you hear this word? Whatever your thought is, I want you to hang on to it for just one moment while I tell you about medical school. Coming into medical school, I knew that this would be a long journey to becoming a doctor. In our clinical years, it would be normal to expect anywhere from 8 to 12-hour days, followed by long nights of studying after we got home. And this too would be on top of extracurricular work, keeping in touch with families, friends, research, and also somehow squeezing in our hobbies too. Much like military training, I knew that this would demand a lot of hard work, perseverance, and dedication. All this constellation of effort that was expected of us, was branded to me and many others as resilience. Now, most commonly in our society, resilience is seen as this ability to show strength in the face of adversity, to show toughness in the face of difficult circumstances, and to recover through challenges. I want to tell you that those aren't the only ways of looking at resilience. 3 summers ago, I did a research project where I was looking at resilience in the medical world. I wanted to look at the narratives that exist about this topic. What kind of language was used to describe resilience? And then eventually, how did that language and those narratives shape the cultures and institutions that we saw in the medical world and in society at large? In my research, I came across 4 key discourses, 3 of which very closely related to something known as burnout. Perhaps you've heard of that dreadful state of mental and physical exhaustion, lack of motivation and excitement, and this total sluggishness at work. That's burnout. No one wants to get to that stage, but it's a sad truth that more than half of all medical residents end up experiencing burnout at some part of their training. This is a problem, and we need to do something about it. Now let's talk about the discourses I discovered. The first discourse described resilience as self-care. To be resilient meant taking on the individual responsibility of being your own hero, knowing that life would be tough. It would be important to nurture yourself and to be well. The second discourse described resilience as prevention. To be resilient meant using resilience as a buffer against these inevitable stresses you'd expect in your training. Resilience was a way of preventing bad things from happening. The third discourse described resilience as competency. This meant that being resilient was a professional responsibility. It's your job to be resilient. That's what doctors do, and they need it because it's a tough career. Now, all 3 of these ways of looking at resilience, self-care, prevention, and competency, had the pattern of relating to that thing I told you about earlier called burnout. Naturally, I then wondered, resilience seems really crucial to my success, and it seems like it's my individual responsibility to make sure I have it. Am I doomed if I don't? And what can I do to really ensure that I nurture my resilience? That same summer, my resilience was tested like never before, and it was time to find out. One early morning in June of 2018, I was on my way to work when I saw police officers outside my neighbor's house. It turned out that their son, who's my friend, was the innocent victim of a car crash just a few hours ago and ended up admitted to the ICU in a nearby hospital. We frantically packed our bags and rushed to the hospital as fast as we could. And when I got there, I was fighting back tears as I saw everyone else shedding theirs. I saw my friend's lifeless body attached to a ventilator, being pumped with medications whose names I had never heard of. When I realized how he presented there, I knew that statistically he had less than a 50% chance of survival. But I didn't share this with anyone because I knew I didn't want to scare them. I remember the nurse came up to me and said, "Hey, you're the medical student, right? I've been a nurse in the ICU for 20 years, and I have never seen anyone survive an accident like this. I'm so sorry." Hearing this news and knowing these facts was not easy. And truth is, I had a tough time finding my place between the two hats that I wore. On one side, I was the medical student trustee, a knowledge translator, who was explaining the science of what was going on to his family and friends. I remember speaking closely to doctors and nurses, attending family meetings, and reassuring everyone when his vitals would change on the monitor. I felt like the one who had to keep himself together for everyone else. Yet, behind all of this, I was still a human being and a friend before I was a medical student. I felt deep sorrow from what I saw, and I was trying to make sense of my own pain. As I shouldered everyone else's hurt, I felt out of place to seek the same comfort for myself. I remember his younger sister asking me, "How come you're not crying?" "Oh wait, you're the medical student, you have to keep yourself together for everyone else." I remember going home to a younger brother who yelled at me for not answering the phone, him not knowing a clue what I had just gone through that day. I remember receiving texts from friends who asked me, "How are you?" And I could only tell them it's okay, as I sat with my cat in my lap, in the basement behind closed doors, shedding tears all alone. It was so ironic that I was surrounded by so many people, yet I felt so deeply alone during this time. My friend was declared dead the next day, and life quickly became a blur after that. I was dazed for a long time, and it took the rest of that summer to really reorient myself before I started the next year of medical school. This was such a strange place to be, and so ironic that as I served as a caretaker for others, I became blindsided to my own humanity. It was not easy getting through this, but eventually I did. But all that happened since then was not an easy journey. I don't see death the same, and I definitely don't see resilience the same. What I realized in those moments is a reflection of what I learned during my research that summer. The discourses that become the most common drown out the quieter ones, and this leads to something called unintended consequences. For us medical trainees, the unintended consequences of seeing resilience this way has been the creation of a macho culture in medicine, one that says burnout is almost inevitable because that's just how the system is. 26-hour shifts are okay, sleepless nights are okay, and being tough in the face of death is needed because it's our job. I get it. We've crafted these as noble qualities, worthy of applause and admiration, but they carry lasting effects on medical trainees and learners. I imagine our discourses and the systems they've created have something to do with that. Burnout should not be the norm. But most importantly, I wonder, what can we do about this? During my research, I came across a fourth, small but very important discourse about resilience. It described resilience as a cultural norm. It said, rather than resilience being solely an individual responsibility, it should be part of a broader cultural practice, one that promotes a unified approach to well-being, and a shift in the forces that lead to burnout in the first place. Rather than saying you need to take care of yourself on your own, it says we're in this together. So let's build systems that keep you well so that you can serve humanity. Now, remember when I asked you, when I say the word resilience, what kind of things come to your mind? I imagine cultural norm and collective effort aren't the first words that you thought of, and that wasn't the case for me. And that's okay, because this is not the most common way of seeing resilience, but I do think it's an important one. And my hope is that we can all work towards strengthening this way of seeing resilience with those around us and in our workplaces. I know that our world is moving incredibly fast, and wellness should be a priority for all of us. In the face of death, in the face of a demanding education, and in the face of a lifelong journey of learning and discovery with highs and lows and everything in between, I'm now learning that resilience is so much more than just self-care, preventing burnout, and meeting a job description. I'm now learning that medicine and our world at large need to normalize and promote a culture in which we support each other, where our macho mentality is perhaps coupled with our shared humanity. Because resilience is so much more than a tool to combat difficulty. It is a value that we all deserve to hold as a collective. And while culture change is hard, I also know that it is absolutely necessary. And that begs the question, how do we achieve it? Dr. Anthony Sushman spoke very wise words at the International Conference for Physician Health. He said that in order to change medical culture, we have to look at three seemingly paradoxical things. First, he says to make big changes, we have to start small. Have a snack day on Fridays and set basic ground rules. Normalize seeking support and being open and honest, and use our voices to speak to power. These small changes can have a ripple effect in the systems around us. Number two, he says to find an answer, we have to be willing to not know. Humility is so important in life, and life will always be full of uncertainty. So we have to fight the pressure to find an answer, and instead take small steps towards finding it, and do that together, understanding that this is a shared responsibility, not an individual one. And number three, he says in order to feel good, we have to feel bad, because the first step towards experiencing change is loss. So helping people manage their loss and their grief is so important in building a culture of unity and support. He also said that we need to stop being skeptics and believe that change is actually possible. I remember our vice dean once telling us, with her fingers pointed like this, you guys need to use your voices to change the system. Don't ever feel that your voice is too small to make a difference. When you see something wrong, speak out loud about it, complain about it, challenge the narratives that you see in the world around you to make it better. I remember a surgeon once told me that the ultimate chronic disease is life itself, the inevitable outcome of which is a lonely death. And I get it, there might be some truth to his words, but for someone who likes discourses and language and knows the power that those two can have on the world around us, I like to rephrase his words as follows. I say that the ultimate gift we all have is life itself, and our resilience is nurtured through every single day in which we live it best, together. To change our culture, we have to act differently, and to act differently, we need to change the discourses around us. You can change the world, and language might be the first, small, yet most powerful step towards doing that. Thank you.